Right, before we get on to Chunky, the first thing you need to do is make sure you have 64-bit Java installed, preferably Java 8, but if you want to use something else, you will probably need to make sure you have Java FX. There's going to be a link to the issue tracker, and there's going to be a few issues on there that you'll just probably need to read through to make sure you know what you're doing. We're going to head over to chunky.lamaki.de. Don't go to Littlebit's website just because it's a bit outdated at this point. Download the latest copy of the Chunky launcher, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this Chunky launcher and I'm just going to put it in a location that I like. We're going to make a folder, Chunky test number 2, and paste it in here. Double click it. If it doesn't double click and open up with this, you probably just need to use jarfix, again in the video description. I recommend using the program or working directory just because if you do it in the home directory, there's a small little problem where you can't have multiple installs of Chunky, which may be something you want to do later down the road. In here you can set your memory. If you have the wrong runtime selected, it will come up here. Generally, if it's in program files, it will be 64-bit. If it's program files x86, that will be the 32-bit version. So enable the console, and I would recommend enabling downloading snapshots at the moment, just because if we don't have this enabled and we check for updates, you will get Chunky version 2.2-314, which is a bit outdated. If you download snapshots, you will get 359, which has a load of features and improvements that just make Chunky better. So you might just want to bear that in mind. We'll just minimize all of this. We don't care about any of that. First and foremost, in the console, you can see here that it found our latest Minecraft version 1.16.2.jar. Basically, it's already got textures. We can change world over here. You can't load a 1.12 world, so I wouldn't recommend it. It's only at the moment Chunky 2.0 can only load 1.13 or above. We're going to load this Hermitcraft world just because I like it. I can zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. You can change the scale over here. You can move with left mouse and drag. It's pretty standard. If you want to load a custom resource pack, you go over to options, edit resource pack, add. You can go in and you can actually select a version.jar. It will load the textures from there if you need to. Otherwise, resource pack, grab a .zip, open it, and grab another one just for the sake of it. Depending on which one is on top is the one that gets applied last, and that will be the one where the majority of textures will come from. Just make sure you get this order correctly, otherwise it's not going to work. Make sure you hit apply, and then once you've done that, you would need to hit reload, but I'm not going to load any. I don't need any. If you need any help, the about sections over here, you got the issue tracker, discussion forum, whatever else. Just use them if you need any help. We're particularly active on the Discord, so again, use it. We're just going to go to a section area I know about where you can make a selection with left click, make a bigger selection with shift left click. If you zoom out a bit, you get this big thing which is called a region, and that's 1024 chunks there. Otherwise, your selection will show up in the bottom left corner here. That's 26 chunks selected. We're just going to make a selection here. Let's say we do that. You can right click, you can clear selection. There's also over here you can clear selection. I don't really use it. Now onto the good stuff. To make a scene, you can right click and go new scene from a selection, or you can do load select chunks under scene. It's going to be a little bit on the slow side because I am recording at the same time. You'll just have to apologize if there's any lag in the video. Unfortunately, here you can see we do have a few warnings. Don't worry about them. There's nothing in particular. I'm just going to change the canvas size here from its default to this, because in this preview it's all CPU driven, so don't set this too high. You want to set it low to something you can handle, and 540p is what I can handle. I already have a rough idea as to what I want to render here, so I'm just going to set myself up in position. I figure it was about there. I think it was. That's fine. Other than that, we're going to jump straight into just a rough idea as to how I do things. I'm just going to set my field of view to about 100. I'm going to set it to 90. There you go. You can see this is what we're going to see. If I just hit play, in fact, I'm going to change my utilization down to 60% here just because otherwise the recording is going to get a bit flaky. This is what we get. You can see there's a bit of noise. That's just inherent to how Chunky works. As this samples per pixel value increases with time, that noise will slowly get cleared up. Generally, more samples is better. Our current target is 1000 samples per pixel, which is a bit overkill. I'm just going to set this to 128 because I feel that would be more than adequate for this scene. We have this samples per second value, which is a rough indication as to how fast we're rendering. A better CPU, and just based upon the settings you're using, will change this value. And of course, we have an ETA. That's not too bad. You can notice here the water is a grey color. That is because of the resource pack. Basically, past Minecraft 1.13 and above, the texture itself and the tinting is done in game, so we're going to have to apply our own color. The little thing I do is I set these values a visibility of 20 and an opacity of 0.2. We've just found that they look better. Custom color, I choose a color over here. It's like a teal kind of color. If we render it now, it doesn't look brilliant, I know, but we'll get into that in a second. It just looks blue. We'll fix that in a second. Setting the water to still gets rid of the waves and gives us a bit of a reflection, but we'll fix this up in a second. Right, what we're going to do now is going to ignore the water and we're going to sort out the sun and the sky. I'm going to set the altitude here to 15. I'm going to set the skylight to 0.3 just because it just makes it easier to see where the sun is, and because I don't really like the sky. Set the sun to there. I'm going to set the color to a bit like an orangey color, maybe about there. Maybe raise the intensity to about 2, and we're just going to hit go. But as you can see, now we've adjusted all these other values, that water is looking a lot better. Basically, the water is dependent on the light it receives, as well as something I've noticed is for some reason the skylight impacts the water quite a bit. And the skylight also impacts this shaded region over here, like over here. If I change this skylight value back up to 1, you can see that there's a lot more light in the image and that water's not looking very good in game. So personally, I like setting this value kind of lower than the default just because it helps with this dramatic lighting. Post-processing is something which I play around with a lot. I find that the Habble tone mapping looks better if we give it 2 seconds to apply that. I like that a lot more. We have richer, more saturated colors, like the water looks better, the sky looks a bit blown out, but that's not necessarily a bad thing in my books. We'll just reset that just so we get back to a clean slate. Now we're going to start applying a few things like fog. So I find a value of 0.01 or 0.1 are a good point to start with. Pick a color. We're going for like an orangey color. I find a bit like an orangey, sort of more of a grey hue looks better. If you go for like a pure color, you end up with very, like if you go for like a pure color, like pure orange like this, when it decides to, yeah, it doesn't look very good. You may want this. I don't. I like this more grey colour. It sort of grounds the fog a bit better. I want to go for a bit more of a vibrant but darker. Give it 2 seconds. When it's ready, it will give me something to work with. I think that's probably better. I like that. You may have noticed that with enabling fog, the sky, there's this weird blend here. This is probably more noticeable if you're using like a sky map, but in this particular scene, you're not going to notice it. If I set this like 0.5, still a bit too much in my book, so I'll set this to 0.3. We're just kind of reducing that intensity of how much is there. What you find is, particularly with sky maps, when you have this sky fog blending set to 1, like you completely wash out that sky map with that fog. So setting this sky fog blend into a lower value just helps sort of rein that fog back in. So you still have that fog there that blends into the sky, but it's just not as intense as it would be normally. So far, like this is, if I just start this is like pretty okay. We're missing something. We're missing clouds. You can get clouds through a sky map, but I personally prefer just enabling them like this. They look, tweak the values a bit to try and get it working. If I do something like this, I mean, already we're starting to get somewhere. Enabling clouds, tweaking their position. We can tweak their X and Y position as we see fit as well. Honestly, I just got pretty lucky whereby the default values give us this really nice and dramatic lighting as the god rays and the sunlight all play off these clouds over here. Over here it's a bit more static, but at the same time it doesn't matter. That's fine. That is to be expected here. We can also start to play around with some other values here. Let's see what happens if we clone the camera. So we clone the camera, I can move the camera around. We switch back to camera 1, it's still in the same position. This is particularly useful, say like you've just got the camera set up, you just got what you want to really render, and then you just think to yourself, I want to like maybe have a look at playing around with some other features. And one of the features you want to play around with is materials, and the problem is if you want to play with materials and you don't want to change the camera, clone the camera. So left click and drag, this tells me it's a smooth quartz slab, so we go under my materials tab, we go to smooth quartz, and I can change the values here. So smooth quartz slab, we'll set this to 1, set all the other smooth quartz to 0.1 just for 2 seconds. You can see that with a specular value of 1 that it is really shiny, so that's not really something we want to do. So we're just going to set this back to, we're going to set this to 0.1 just because I feel that is a more like adequate value. Also in this view, I mean, you can go around and you can see some other things. Now this, you can see some other things, like say we want to make this shiny or we wanted to play around with this. I mean, you can use this just to figure out what blocks are and to change them, but we're not going to do any more of that. We're going to go back to camera 1. We're just going to hit start, give it a second, and it's hard to tell, but that boat is a bit more shiny than what it was before. Now let's start playing around. We're going to enable these emitters. I'm going to change their intensity to about 20 and we're just going to hit go. So already we've gone into this whole discussion about noise, but there's one thing which I haven't really mentioned yet, which are emitters. As you can see, while like parts of the image, like around here, like the noise is like decreasing with time. Around here, noise appears to be increasing with time. So what is going on there? There's a bit of a funny story with how Chunky works. It's kind of sort of random, and when you start getting these problems of you have these emitters that are really small, light sources that are really small, and you start talking about light that's randomly bounced around, you start having to talk about probability, and the basic gist of it is there's a low probability that you're gonna hit one of these light sources. So despite the fact that I said 128 samples would have been fine for this scene, the second we enable fog, the second we then enable emitters, it was particularly more with emitters, like emitters will require around 8,000 samples per pixel, maybe even into the millions. The probability required to get enough data to decrease the amount of noise is just astronomical. Yeah, this render time ETA, yeah, you're going to require a lot more time to get this anywhere near good. And there's a few little things we can do. So as I sort of just hinted at, there's this aspect of probability. So if we go into here and we search for torches, why am I talking about torches? Well, torches are smaller than a block, meaning that there's a low probability you're going to hit them. And as one of the offsets that was applied was to think, well, if they're smaller, they would need to emit more light. This is not true. The fact that they're smaller leads to this problem of the fact that their emittance is so high leads to this problem of they just lead to a lot more noise. If you set the emittance back to 1, yeah, there's low probability we hit them, but it fixes the noise on them. So just make sure you do that. Make sure you set the materials for torches, both torches, the emittance to 1. And as you can see already, I mean, we're still getting this noise that builds up time, but it's a lot better because those torches over here and over wherever else in this scene, they're not doing as much damage to the scene. We're still going to require a couple of thousand samples per pixels to fix this image, but I'll get into that in a few seconds. The last thing I want to cover in sort of standard Chunky is this camera, and particularly with autofocus. So I'm just going to pick a point. I'm going to say over here, I'm going to right click, set target, autofocus, nothing happened. But you can see we got the subject distance and the depth of field. If I bring this depth of field slider down, hey look, everything else gets blurry, but there's a few things. Anything at this 28 block or meter mark is in focus. That's just roughly how you do focusing. You just right click, hit autofocus, and you're done. There is another option, which is you can see my center crosshairs here. If you don't select the target, that will be where your point will be that you focus on. But there is another way. If we set the depth of field to 10, we take the subject distance slider and we just change it manually. You can see that as we increase it, as things at that distance are then being selected, they come into and out of focus. So we can use this about 68 it was. You can see that boat's in focus. I'm just going to bring this back a bit because I think, no, it is 68. This is how you do a manual focus. We then set the depth of field to a value like 500. You can see that this over here is slightly blurry. It's often to the distance is slightly blurry, but everything in the middle should be in focus. We just hit the render on this one. I've turned emitters off for a second just so you can sort of get a rough gist of this. But yeah, we have a very sort of soft focus in here. It's kind of hard to tell, but there's a bit of a soft focus around the fore and background elements. But now we're going to get into the fun stuff. We're just going to have to save this scene, so we're just going to come up here. We're just going to change the name to test 1. Hit save. It's saving. Saving takes a while, but you can see it's now saved that. In our directory here, we now have a folder called scenes, test 1 in here. If you were using the Chunky 2.2, the version we spoke about before, without using snapshots, everything would be dumped into a single folder, the scenes directory. At least with these current snapshots, you do have a directory here where all your files will get stored in there. It's just a lot nicer. But now let us do something cool. What we're going to do is we're going to head back to Lamaki's website. We're going to go to the Denoising Plugin. We're going to get the latest release there, and we're also going to get this section on denoising automatically by grabbing the denoiser. Because we're using Chunky 2.0, we need to grab the denoiser for Chunky 2, and we also need to grab the open image denoiser for our platform, which is Windows. Of course, grab it for the platform you're using. We're going to make sure we've saved this. Of course, you've got to confirm if you have already saved it. I'm just going to save it again just because I don't want to lose this one. Give it 2 seconds and that's done. We'll close that. And in here, we're going to click on Chunky Launcher. We're also going to open up our downloads folder because we need it. So as you can see, that these are the folders we have in here. We need to open the manage plugin section. That gives us a plugins folder. Grab the denoiser.jar. We put that in there. And the next bit is we need to extract this zip. Now, you can put this wherever you want. You can chuck it. It doesn't matter where you put it. Back into here, we're going to have to just close that for 2 seconds. Back into the plugin manager. The plugin we put in is now there. We save and launch that. Yeah, you can put this Odin thing wherever you want. It doesn't actually matter, but you can see that now we actually have this plugin enabled. It's in this sidebar here. We just need to navigate. We give it the path to the denoiser.exe, which is in here, which is wherever you put it. Select Odin denoise.exe, open that. That's now there. We can then load our scene by doing that. It's just literally the save and load buttons up here. It's again, you will have some warnings. There's not much we can do about that. Now we have a little fun thing. So 128 samples should be enough. I'm just going to hit go. We'll render 2 images. We have the normal map here, and then we will have the albedo map, which will render just after. Basically, these are what's called feature images. They provide additional information to the AI-based denoiser, this Odin, which will work on pretty much any modern system. We pop into the directory here. We can see for this scene, we have the albedo and we have the normal. We'll just open one of these. They're just effectively they're a raw image, uncompressed image. It's a 32-bit image. Yeah, it's very high precision. It's big. Don't really need to worry about that. 64. There's a little bit of a bug when rendering this noisy image that sometimes it won't use the target SSP, so you just have to re-enter it. And as soon as it then comes up saying you're going up to 64, you'll be fine. So you can see here that, I mean, this is expected. I mean, we got the noise in the fog and the areas lit by the sun are being cleared up as expected, but noise like around on this tree and around here are just building up over time because, I mean, we haven't really reached the point where increasing samples is decreasing noise for emitters yet. It's a really complex sort of subject, but I'll show you the result once it's done. It's now finished, and as you can see, it's not denoised. Now, you may be wondering what's going on there, but you just have to check into our folder here. Snapshots is where we have our raw image. the denoiser hasn't really been told what to do yet, so it's not put in the correct folder, but this is what we have. And hopefully you can tell from this distance, but to make it easier, I'm just going to zoom in to 50%, give or take, on both sides, and it should be very apparent what we have here. So a few things to really point out straight away is, yeah, the denoiser has denoised the image, but it has inherently blurred it. So in some places, like the water particularly, you can see it doesn't quite look right. It kind of has this oil painting like effect, and like there may be some odd artifacts in places where, say, this side of the boat maybe isn't being lit uniformly. Unfortunately, that's just an inherent property of the denoiser, especially when dealing with these low sample counts of just 64 samples per pixel. Ideally, the denoiser would probably be doing better with something like, especially with like emitters, the denoiser would probably do better with something like 512 samples per pixel. Needless to say, it's doing a pretty good job. Like a scene like this, I mean, as I said, this would probably take something like 8,000 samples of the D0 to sort of do in a sheer brute force approach, which could take hours or tens of hundreds of hours or anything like that. The denoiser really does come along and cut this render time down a lot, so use it. And that's really like a basic overview of Chunky and all of its features. I mean, there was a few things I haven't touched on, like entities, like you can click on the player and hey look, you can customize head, all the different body parts. You can attach parts to the bodies, you can add players around the thing if you want to. There's all these different camera modes you can play with. Of course, you have all the different sky map options, and all these really fancy tips and tricks you can do for maybe doing like, oh, I want to do like a rainy or a night scene. There will be a way to do it. I'll quickly show you what this looks like at a full 4K at like a decent sample count just at the end of this video. Of course, if you have any questions, ask them in the comment section, or you can always head over to the Discord, which will be linked in the description. Anyway, thank you for watching. I don't want to keep you any longer, and I hope you have a great day.